The snow lay in shallow, jagged drifts along the edge of the Holtzwihr woods, crusted over by days of bone-chilling frost. Beneath that white blanket, the ground was iron, frozen so solid it resisted the strike of a shovel and the stomp of a boot alike. High above, a pale winter sun struggled to pierce a heavy ceiling of gray clouds. In the Alsace region of eastern France, outside the tiny village of Holtzwihr, the men of the 3rd Infantry Division moved into position. They were exhausted. They had been fighting across the globe for what felt like a lifetime. Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, southern France. Now they faced the Colmar Pocket, the last German stronghold west of the Rhine. Among these battle-hardened men stood a company commander who looked more like a schoolboy than a soldier, 2nd Lieutenant Audie Murphy. He was 19 years old, weighed barely 110 pounds, and his boots were falling apart. But by the time the sun set on January 26, 1945, this baby-faced lieutenant would perform an act of individual combat so extraordinary it would defy military logic. Audie Murphy wasn't supposed to be a hero. In 1942, after Pearl Harbor, he tried to enlist in the Marines and the paratroopers. They laughed at him. They said he was too small, too slight. Finally, the Army took him. He didn't just join the Army, he joined the 15th Infantry Regiment, a unit that would see almost continuous combat for 2 years. Murphy learned the hard way that survival in the infantry required 3 things: speed, alertness, and a total lack of hesitation. From the mountains of Italy to the mud of France, Murphy rose through the ranks, not because he wanted power, but because the officers above him kept dying. By October 1944, he was a staff sergeant. During a fierce fight near Cleary, he climbed atop a disabled tank destroyer to direct artillery fire while bleeding from a hip wound. That earned him the Distinguished Service Cross. By January 1945, he was a 2nd lieutenant commanding Company B. But Company B was a ghost of its former self. Casualties had stripped them down. They were low on ammo, shivering in the cold, and waiting for a German counterattack they knew was coming. The Alsace region of eastern France, outside the tiny village of Holtzwihr, the men of the 3rd Infantry Division moved into position. At 1400 hours on January 26th, the Germans moved. Through his binoculars, he saw them. 6 German tanks, deadly Panzer IVs, emerging from the tree line. Behind them, waves of disciplined German infantry in white camouflage. Company B's defense was fragile. They had 2 M10 tank destroyers for support. The first M10 fired, knocking out a German tank, but the retaliation was instant. A German shell slammed into the American position. One tank destroyer was disabled, the other turned and retreated under the heavy barrage. Murphy realized the math was simple. If they stayed in those shallow foxholes, Company B would be erased. He grabbed his radio and shouted the order: "Withdraw! Fall back to the woods!" His men hesitated. Moving across the snow meant being targets, but Murphy repeated the order with such authority they had no choice. As his men scrambled back toward the trees, Murphy did something insane. He stayed behind. Near the forward position sat the disabled M10 tank destroyer. It was a metal coffin, engulfed in flames. Smoke billowed from its open turret, and the ammunition inside was already cooking off, exploding from the heat. But mounted on top was a 50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun. Murphy climbed onto the burning hull. He was silhouetted against the fire, a perfect target for every German rifleman in the field. He grabbed the spade grips of the made deuce and squeezed. The heavy 50 caliber rounds tore through the German skirmish lines. At the same time, Murphy was on his radio, calmly calling in coordinates to the U.S. artillery. "Let him have it," he shouted into the receiver. For nearly an hour, it was one man against an army. German infantry got within 100 yards, close enough to see his face, but Murphy swept them back with lead. The heat from the burning tank destroyer was so intense it singed his hair, yet he stayed on the gun.
He was wounded in the leg, his trousers soaked in blood, but he compartmentalized the pain. He kept firing. He kept calling in artillery. He created the illusion that an entire battalion was holding that line. Finally, the German momentum broke. Seeing their infantry decimated and feeling the weight of the American artillery, the tanks began to retreat. The unbeatable assault had been stopped by a 110-pound kid on a burning wreck. When the last belt of ammunition ran dry, Murphy finally dismounted. He didn't go to the medic. He walked back into the woods, found his men, and organized a counterattack to retake the ground. By dusk, the line at Holtzwihr was secure. In June 1945, Audie Murphy was awarded the Medal of Honor. By the time the war ended, he was the most decorated soldier in American history, earning every medal for valor the country had to offer, some of them twice. But the war never truly left him. When he returned home, he suffered from what we now call PTSD. He had nightmares, slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow, and struggled with the transition to civilian life. Yet, in a final act of courage, he became one of the first public figures to speak openly about the invisible wounds of war, advocating for veterans' mental health. Audie Murphy died in a plane crash in 1971, but his story isn't just a legend, it's documented fact of what happens when a person refuses to give up. Today, the fields of Holtzwihr are quiet. The snow still falls every January, but if you stand at the edge of the Reedweir woods, you can almost hear the echo of a .50 caliber machine gun and the defiance of a 19-year-old who held the line so his brothers could live.